everyone, Lisa here. Hope you're well. Happy full moon in Cancer. Um, yes, so a quick update on Bitcoin. Obviously, the go-to video is still the max pain, max gain video that I did for the solar eclipse in Sagittarius, which is good until around about the end of April, beginning of May. But I just wanted to kind of have a look at the upcoming full moon and see where we are with Bitcoin. Obviously, um, Bitcoin has been kind of in a bit of a downward trend since the end of November. And the fear and greed index is quite high at the moment. And, a lot of people are kind of wondering what's kind of going on because Bitcoin has essentially broken the mold in terms of the usual kind of patterns and things. So I'm going to have a look at that quickly and just kind of see where we are in terms of the astrology. And then I'm going to also quickly have a look at Ethereum because some people have been asking me to start looking at some of the altcoins. So I'm going to have a look at the Ethereum chart and see what we can see in relation to the full moon. Yeah, so let's get into it. So as I was saying, it's been an interesting kind of month or two with cryptocurrency. We had that Saturn-Uranus square back in December, and there was the build-up to it right from the beginning of December, and it kind of continues because Uranus is only really, Saturn and Uranus are only really kind of coming out of orb of each other now. And in fact, Uranus is due to station on the 18th of January, and that's going to see it change direction and pull away from Saturn. So I think that's going to be interesting. We're going to look at that in the chart. But I think it's fair to say that in terms of the fear and greed index, if we have a look at this from today, we're in extreme fear. So we are more or less in the same territory that we were in during the dip in May 2021, which I think was scored around about 19 at its kind of lowest. And yes, I mean, Bitcoin has lost about 20% of its value, but that's entirely normal for this risk on volatile assets. So the question is now, can Bitcoin recover? And I think, a lot of analysts are saying that the next 2 weeks, kind of towards the end of January is going to be quite crucial for Bitcoin because it could go either way now. We kind of, we're at the bottom of a head and shoulders pattern and we can either break to the upside or we can go down. And the question is, which direction is Bitcoin going to go? And a lot of people feel, particularly kind of analysts, feel that, if Bitcoin doesn't pull out of its kind of downward trend by the end of the month, or, by the end of February, the latest, then we could be in a bear market. So we kind of have a fork in the road, and that's why I've titled my video sort of what it is. But, as you know, I don't feel, looking at the astrology, that it is the end of the bull market, and that we are in unusual territory because of the shift from retail to institutional psychology. So we're going to look at all of that and look at the next 2 weeks in particular, because that's what the full moon kind of waning moon cycle covers, and just see what we can kind of see. Will Bitcoin be able to pull out of this slump, this downward trend, between now and the end of January? So here's the Bitcoin chart, and you can see that I've superimposed the full moon on the outside of it. So it's really interesting, if we consider what's happening in terms of the astrology. So the second half of January is going to be quite slow, and that's because not only will Venus be retrograde until 29th of January, but we also have Mercury retrograde now, and that started around about the 14th and will continue until approximately the 4th of February, depending on what time zone you're in. So second half of January, I fully expected when I did my forecast back in, when was it, November, December, that it would be a slow time generally for trading. As I say, if we look at this chart here, we can see Saturn in Aquarius, which is with Mercury, which is recently stationed, and it's pulling away from Uranus, and Uranus is due to station on the 18th, so kind of within a day of this full moon. So Uranus is going to pull away, it's going to change direction, and instead of moving kind of anti-clockwise, it's going to start moving, instead of moving clockwise, it's going to move anti-clockwise. So this is going to be quite interesting for Bitcoin because, first and foremost, Uranus in the Bitcoin chart rules investors. So, it can be a strong signal of investor sentiment, a shift in investor sentiment. And when Uranus does something as big as shifting from retrograde to direct motion, it means that we could have a change in momentum that's positive. So I think that's something to really look forward to, particularly given that in the Bitcoin chart, the part of fortune sits at about 17 degrees of Taurus. So it's not far off from where Uranus is here in about 10 degrees of Taurus. And I think also as these two planets start to separate from each other, we will move away from the fear and volatility that we saw not just in the crypto market, but also in stock markets, during December, because of the Fed interest rate hikes and the sort of the taper, that the sort of extent of it was unexpected, and sent shockwaves through the market. So I think that fear that we're seeing in the fear and greed index should start to abate. So that's the first thing. Then the second thing is, as I say, that Venus is retrograde. So Venus, you can see over here at about 13 degrees of Capricorn. So it's more or less conjunct the Bitcoin sun. And essentially, since it's been retrograde, it's moved from approaching the Bitcoin Jupiter, which, as I said, is a very bullish sign. So it's moved back towards the Bitcoin sun. And it will continue to move backwards until the end of January, when it will station. And we're going to look at the astrology of what the station looks like, because I think that could be a very key indicator of what kind of comes next. But needless to say, I think that during this period, while Venus is retrograde, that things are likely to continue to be a little bit meh, shall we say. And I don't really foresee major trend changes until we come to the end of the month, when we have, as I said, the stationing of Venus, and we also have very soon afterwards we've got a new moon. So I think that's going to be a really kind of pivotal time. And then the other thing about this full moon is that it happens across the signs of Cancer and Capricorn. So you can see the moon here at around about 27 degrees of Cancer, and opposite is the sun at about 27, and you can see that it's with Pluto. So the two planets made a conjunction the day before the full moon on the 16th, but this conjunction will still be in play as we get to the full moon. So it kind of keys into what I call a mystic rectangle, which is quite an interesting aspect pattern actually. And if you want to know more about that, then have a listen to my full moon forecast, which is up on YouTube. I will put a link to it in in the description box as well. But basically, a mystic rectangle consists of two oppositions, two trines, and two sextiles. And what it is doing is it's combining positive and negative relationships in a way that calls for integration. So it's quite positive actually on the whole. So in the case of the mystic triangle or rectangle, we've got it's essentially between the opposition between the sun and the moon, which you can see here. So this is the full moon along with Pluto, and then the nodes. So the nodes for some reason haven't come out in this chart, but the nodes are sitting at around about well, you can see here in the aspect grid that the nodes are making 6,000 trines to the Bitcoin, well, to the sun and to the moon. So those are in Scorpio and Taurus. And then so those are the two oppositions essentially, is the south and the north node, the sun and the moon, which are on opposite sides of the earth during the full moon. And then those 4 points plus Pluto are essentially making positive and negative aspects to each other. So it's essentially kind of creating a rectangle in this area of the chart, which is kind of interesting because it straddles the ascendant descendant axis, in other words, the horizon of the Bitcoin chart. So it's a very liminal space where we move from kind of dark to light, and from kind of the private sphere into the public sphere or the collective sphere. And so I think what's essentially is kind of happening is that Bitcoin kind of does its own thing, But of course, the sort of the price chart and does also depend very strongly on how Bitcoin interacts with investors. And I kind of feel as though that relationship is in a process of shifting. Um, and that as it does so, as people get used to this idea that, okay, well, things didn't quite go to plan the way that we expected them to. We didn't have the December high like we had in December 2020, which is usually what happens with Bitcoin. So in other words, the 4-year cycle appears to be either broken or it's been elongated. So, time factors now are kind of like need to be adjusted. And we could have a top later, which is certainly, to me what the astrology suggests. And we will go over, again, my top 3 dates in the immediate future for, when we could have a new, like a bounce, essentially. But I think essentially what's happening is that the movements of Bitcoin, which is represented by the left-hand side of the chart, is kind of being reconciled by what's happening with investors, stakeholders, that kind of thing on the right. And so there's this process of integration happening where people are getting used to the idea that things are not going to go according to the usual plan, that things have changed, and that this isn't necessarily something to be kind of afraid of, that it's not necessarily all doom and gloom. And as people get used to that idea and they start catastrophizing, I think they'll start to kind of settle down, and as I say, I think confidence will return to the market. So I fully expect that this is going to happen towards the end of January, as I say, beginning of February, when we do have, first of all, a new moon, and then we also have the stationing of both Venus and Mercury. And you can see Mercury's at a very crucial part in the Bitcoin chart. It's sitting right on the descendant near to the North Node. So, as I said, it kind of got here around about the time that the Fed made its last major announcement about, oh my God, inflation's higher than we thought. We've got to take, much more stringent action than we initially anticipated, much quicker. We need to taper faster, etc., etc. And this did send shockwaves to the market. It did create panic. So I do think that this combination here does indicate, that particular relationship. And as I say, Mercury is retrograde, so it's going to start moving back into this section of the chart, so below the horizon. And while it does that, I do think that it's good to sort of not speculate too much and kind of go crazy. That I think the important thing is going to be the price remains in like healthy levels. So, a lot of people are saying, well, Bitcoin has kind of like, it's dropped to the kind of the 40k level, and then it's kind of bounced just above that at about 42. Is it going to drop to 30, or is it going to go back up? Because essentially what we needed to do is to go back up to around about 51, 52 in order for the bull market to kind of continue. And my gut feeling is that it will, but it won't do that until Mercury first of all stations, and Venus in particular, because in terms of the Bitcoin chart, Mercury rules the second house of kind of price and value, and Venus is the wealth maker. So Venus, even though it rules the fourth house, so the kind of the fundamentals of Bitcoin, it also rules the 11th house, which is kind of hopes and fears. And Bitcoin is very much associated with hope for many people as a way out of, economic slavery and sort of the McJob. But just generally speaking, when it comes to financial astrology, Venus is very much considered to be the sort of the planet of billionaires rather than millionaires. That millionaires is kind of Jupiter. But I do think it's interesting that, as I say, the Sun is also very close to the Bitcoin Jupiter. So it's within 2 degrees. So it should reach the Bitcoin Jupiter within 2 days' time. So we could have a little bounce there. And I think that's worth bearing in mind. And that will happen just as we get to Aquarius season. So the Sun is moving into Aquarius on around about the 20th of January, depending on your time zone. And this is when it comes, it will pass Jupiter, and I think we could see a nice recovery at that point. So my gut instinct is that we're not going to drop down to 30, that we're going to sort of like see a little bit of a bounce. And I'm trying to think what else there is kind of going on in the full moon chart. Let's talk about Pluto as well. So Pluto, as I say, is making this conjunction to the sun, and so obviously this keys into the full moon energy, and I think this is this is interesting because it does rule the fifth house of speculation. You can see it's this kind of rule of the fifth house cusp. So it does often have to do with the futures market and with things like leverage. And what's hidden. So it could be that some factors come to light to do with the futures market, some kind of maybe hidden kind of mechanism or something that, like a statistic that we didn't really sort of see before, that will give us a fuller picture, of what's kind of going on below the surface, and that could potentially be hopeful, because it could help people to understand a little bit better about why why Bitcoin is kind of structurally doing what it's doing. So, full moons are a time of illumination, and it is entirely possible that this Pluto-Sun conjunction could bring about some kind of aha moment or revelation, particularly from the point of view of like a technical analyst, or someone who's like an on-chain analyst, that would help to explain possibly why we've been kind of trading sideways for so long and been in such a downtrend. But I mean, my instinctive feeling is that it has to do with that Saturn Uranus square, which, as I say, we are coming out of now. You can see Saturn and Uranus here. They are exactly at 3 degrees separation. So for me, that is very much kind of coming out of the shadow of that square, kind of out from the sort of the other side, if you like. And I think that the pivoting of Uranus is going to be really important for Bitcoin, just in terms of a shift in sentiment. I think that's going to be the factor to watch. With Uranus, so often is the unpredictable factor, the factor that's you can't quite kind of put your finger on. And I think it's going to be the one to watch between now and the end of January. But as I was saying, generally speaking, I'm feeling very optimistic, particularly about February. I think we just need to sort of kind of realize that this is a kind of a fork in the road, and not to sort of panic, to just sort of hold and wait for clear signs that there is a structure change in the market, but which I do think is coming. So this is the chart that I've cast for Venus, the Venus station, which happens, as I say, on the 29th of January. And it's super interesting, actually, because first of all, we've got Venus down here at about 11 degrees of Capricorn. So you can see that it's past the Bitcoin Sun, and it's moving back towards the Bitcoin Mars. And then it stops at 11 degrees, and it reverses direction, and it starts to move in the opposite direction. So it starts to move kind of anti-clockwise again. And I think this is going to be really pivotal for Bitcoin, because it's going to start an increase of positive sentiment as it moves back towards the Bitcoin Sun, which is at 13, and then starts to approach the Bitcoin Jupiter at 29. Now, obviously, that's going to take a while, because Venus doesn't move as quickly as some of the other planets. But nonetheless, I think it's a sign of a positive shift in sort of sentiment, along with Uranus, which we can see here at 10 degrees. And what's so interesting is that around about the time that Venus stations, she will be making a trine to Uranus. So to me, the combining of those two factors is a really positive sign for investors and for a shift in sentiment. So I do see the end of January as being a really key time when we could see the chart break to the upside, and certainly push beyond, or kind of up to that key 52k level that I think we need to see in order for, from a technical point of view, in order to sort of think, okay, yes, we're moving back into an uptrend now. So I think that's really important. And then you can see as well that at the same time that the Aquarius Sun has now literally just crossed over the horizon and is moving back up into the sky, if you like, and is approaching Saturn, and is also going over the Bitcoin North Node, which can be an indicator of kind of crowd psychology. So it can very often be about a shift in collective herd mentality. And of course, the sun is the ruler of the Bitcoin chart. So this is really positive. So again, this augurs well and says to me, I think we could have a very positive shift in sentiment like at that point. The other key thing, of course, is the thing to watch, though, is this Neptune, which is at about 21 degrees. So it's still opposite the Bitcoin Saturn. And of course, that could be the one factor that sort of muddies the water a little bit and keeps people in a state of confusion and fear, which it has done, for quite some months now. But I think, these other factors certainly could outweigh this one factor, which has been around for a while. And I think, with Neptune reaching kind of 21, it should start to pull away from the Bitcoin Saturn. It's not going to be sort of too far off. So that's, I think, that's the one factor that still concerns me, as far as depressing price is concerned. But otherwise, I think the fact that Venus is stationing and Mercury will also station within a couple of days, so very close to the new moon in February, which I think is going to be an important one to watch. It's one of the dates that I picked for that I thought looked very positive for, like, a new sort of top, not necessarily an all-time high, but a top certainly in terms of recent trends, since sort of end of November. So yes, I think quite positive. And also we've got Jupiter here in Pisces, and it's making a sextile to the Bitcoin Mars, which is also really positive because it rules the midheaven. So that to me is also a very good sign of health, like a healthy structure, of kind of robustness, that kind of thing. So I think we could see a very nice bounce, as I say, towards the end of January, beginning of February, particularly once Mercury stations. So I think, the next 2 weeks is going to be important, and I think it's just a question of holding your nerve and not panicking and being patient until we get a trend change at the end of the month. So just to kind of recap from my other video about possible dates, I did say initially that I didn't think January was going to be all that because of Venus and Mercury being retrograde. But I do think that it is an important pivot in the market structure, which is, I think, possible by the end of the month when Venus stations. So I think that the new moon in early February, I think about the 6th of February, is going to be really important for this kind of renewal of hope and that kind of thing. And then I think, kind of mid-February, Venus and Mars are going to make a really lovely conjunction in Aquarius. So this is sort of in this area of the chart. And I think that that this could bode really, really well. You can see them here at about 16. So they're first going to make the conjunction in Capricorn, and then they'll make their conjunction in Aquarius the following month. So I think February, March could be really, really good for Bitcoin. And obviously, when we get closer to the time, I will look at this because it is at the full moon in Leo, so kind of mid-February, when the Sun applies by conjunction to the Bitcoin Venus. So I do see this as being very positive. You can see it here. And yeah, so I do think that kind of end of January, beginning of February, we will see a kind of a shift in sentiment, which won't necessarily be reflected in terms of like massive movements in the chart, but I think Bitcoin will in terms of kind of technical indicators, be moving back into sort of being giving off bullish signals, if you like, and sort of like have recovered. My feeling is that it will kind of move up to that 52K mark, which is kind of crucial as a sort of a measure of of health, if you like. So yes, I think that's looking quite positive. Now, in terms of full moon and gates, in terms of the the human design, at this particular full moon, the sun will be in hexagram 60 line 2. So this is in the root center down at the bottom, and of course the root is all about money and security. So I think that's important, and it's in hexagram 60, which is called articulating the crossings. And for me, this is very much about a kind of a crossroads or a fork. a choice point, if you like. Very often certainly in Chinese terms, they talk about joints in bamboo. So it's kind of coming up to a joint in the bamboo where you move from one sort of section of bamboo to another. And so I do see this echoing this idea that we're coming up to a sort of a fork or a choice point as we move towards the end of January, beginning of February. And I think that this could see us coming out of this mini slump that we've had due to the Saturn-Uranus square, and moving into a much more kind of positive time when we start to see an uptrend again. And then it's interesting that it's in line 2, which is approaching a new time. So in I Ching terms, it says prepare to take action, but without being excessive. So in other words, sort of like ready yourself, have your ducks in a row so that you're ready to act, when the opportunity arises. And it does also say that not acting could see the way closed. In other words, be ready for a change and don't be complacent, but at the same time, don't be taking huge risks. But just, be prepared, have your strategies in place so that you can take action at very short notice. And then the moon is in hexagram 56 line 2, which is in the throat. And of course, in human design terms, both the root and the throat are very much associated with manifesting and with material abundance. So this is also, I think, looking really positive. So hexagram 56 is known as the wanderer. So it's about kind of moving outside of the usual like norms of society, and you could see that as Bitcoin having traveled outside of the usual sort of chart structures. So it's the wanderer who's on a journey, but line 2 is about coming up to a rest house where you can kind of join with others and of like mind. So again, I feel this is a kind of a coalescing of, or confluence of factors coming together, which will lead ultimately to a change in trend, sort of to the upside, if you like. The one thing they do say is take care of your possessions, though. So it's the same as, if you were traveling and you went to stay at, like a hostel or a place that you weren't that necessarily familiar with, you wouldn't leave your purse lying around, or, just kind of go out and leave all your valuables sort of like lying around either. You'd put them in the safe. And I think they're also just saying here, definitely do what you can to sort of safeguard yourself and to hedge against risk, and not take any crazy maneuvers, but at the same time, realize that we're in new territory as well. I think this idea of the wanderers, everyone's in new territory, but we all kind of in the same boat, but we are coming up to a kind of a rest point where we can sort of breathe a sigh of relief as we come out at the other end of that Saturn-Uranus scary sort of energy that we had, particularly over December, and kind of take a breath, which is very much in keeping with the themes of this full moon, actually, which is all about kind of resting after this sort of energy of the Capricorn new moon at the beginning of January, which is all about kind of, let's go out there and, get things going and, put our New Year's resolutions in place and kind of go for it in terms of success and career and all that kind of stuff. So this is about a kind of a pause in the journey. So I think that's very much in keeping with the other themes that we've got at the full moon. So as I say, I do see the next 2 weeks as not being particularly eventful. The key thing being the end of that waning moon cycle when we come to the stationing of Venus on the 29th of January. I think that's when we could see a shift. So I think it's more case of stopping now to rest and consolidate your position and think about where you want to sort of be headed once things change in beginning of February. So let's move on now quickly to Ethereum. Now, I've never done an Ethereum analysis before, so you'll have to kind of bear with me. And I'm also getting used to the chart, which I've recently adjusted based on some new information about where the sort of the genesis of the Ethereum kind of block came from. And apparently it came from the Ethereum group in Geneva, in Switzerland. So I've changed the location to Geneva, and I've taken the time that some other astrologers have for this particular genesis, which is around about 4:30 on the 30th of July 2015. So this gives us a rising of, I think it's called Sagittarius rising, about 0 degrees at Sagittarius. But we do have Saturn kind of rising on the ascendant. You can see it here. And Saturn is still in the late degrees of Scorpio. So it's an interesting one, actually. It's not really what I expected for Ethereum. You know, people tend to joke about Ethereum as being this sort of kind of rainbows and unicorns as opposed to Bitcoin, which is seen as a bit more kind of hardcore and badass. But I mean, this is not really a kind of a rainbows and unicorns chart, I must be honest. We've got the moon in detriment in Sirius Capricorn, and we've also got this, okay, we've got the sun in Leo, which is quite positive, but it's again, it's not a sort of a light-hearted energy in the sense that you know, Leo is quite sort of majestic, and it's also, you know, it's the same degree actually as the Bitcoin, what you call it, ascendant. In fact, if we go back, you can see here that the Bitcoin ascendant is around about 7 to 8 degrees of Leo. So in other words, the Ethereum sun sits right on the Bitcoin ascendant here, which is kind of interesting. Yes, so the sun in Leo, and then we've got Mars in Cancer, which again is not really a very happy position for Mars. Mars is exalted in Capricorn, so to be in Cancer, which is the opposite sign, is, I think, where Mars is in detriment, if I'm not mistaken. So again, not a very happy place for Mars. But we do have this very interesting Venus, Jupiter out of sign conjunction in Virgo and Leo. So that's kind of interesting, the combining of the two benefics. Very positive, very bullish, and it could be why Ethereum has performed so well. It's kind of outperformed Bitcoin in proportional terms, not necessarily in price, but in terms of how much it's increased within the space of a year. So that may have something to kind of to do with it. But as I say, it's an interesting chart and not really one that I kind of expected. But in terms of the full moon. We've got the Sun and Pluto sitting here very close to the Ethereum moon actually, and then opposite that we've got the full moon in Cancer, which is just past the Bitcoin Mars. I mean, not the Bitcoin Mars, the Ethereum Mars, and so that's the kind of the major opposition happening, and that happens in the 2nd and the 8th houses, which are a lot to do with money and finances. So it does suggest that. Certainly in terms of price, that a lot will depend on kind of adding value in terms of things like layering. So this will have more to do with like NFTs and smart contracts, that kind of thing, rather than the sort of the trading price of Ethereum, which obviously it tracks Bitcoin. So it tends to, whatever happens with Bitcoin, Ethereum tends to kind of follow. So I think, if we consider that the Sun and Pluto are sitting on that moon in the 2nd house, I mean, they are making a trine to some of the stuff in the Ethereum 10th house. But at the same time, Mars is making a square to those very same patterns. So, yeah, I must be honest, I don't see this as being like overly positive. And then we've got this retrograde Venus sitting here exactly on the Ethereum Pluto. So that can sometimes ameliorate the effect of Pluto. So, to have Pluto in the 2nd house, again, is also very interesting. It does kind of point to... perhaps, why people are kind of associating Ethereum with institutions, and particularly with people who like stable coins, that because Pluto can be about sort of like the plutocracy, the sort of the 1%, who do seem to be quite bullish on Ethereum, possibly, as I say, because of its connection, because of its link to stable coins. So a lot of stable coins run on the Ethereum network. I'm trying to see what it rules in the chart. So it rules the 12th house cusp, and which can be a little bit about secret dealings or sort of backroom deals, slightly shady activities, or just activities to do with, kind of deals that are done behind kind of closed doors, that kind of thing. So it'll be interesting to see if some stuff does come out, because I do think that that Sun-Pluto conjunction, keying into the full moon, could be about illuminating secrets or secret dealings or things that are being hidden up till now. So it'll be interesting to see what happens over the next 2 weeks in terms of Ethereum, if anything kind of comes to light about, developments or workings that have been happening behind the scenes that the majority of us have not been aware of. And then, if we think about the other part of that equation, that we've also got this mystic rectangle happening with the nodes. I don't know why the nodes haven't shown up in my chart. It's actually quite annoying. But the nodes here, let me see. Yeah, so again, they're making positive aspects to the sun and the moon. So they are in Taurus and Scorpio, I think. So, in the sort of the 5th or the 6th house, and the 11th and the 12th. So again, that kind of points to possible developments in relation to like new ways of using Ethereum or the Ethereum network, that could allow for further like use cases for Ethereum. And a lot of people at the moment are very focused on things like NFTs and so on. I think from what I can remember, I think Raoul Pal was talking about, NFTs possibly getting big in sort of January. It's now kind of towards the second half of January, and as I say, we do have Mercury and Venus kind of retrograde. It's interesting that here we've got, the retrograde Mercury, and it's coming up to a conjunction to the Ethereum Saturn. You can see here, or no, to transiting Saturn, in the 3rd house. So that can sometimes sort of, lead to a temporary kind of call to be safe, or it can lead to caution that means that people are not quite so keen to take risks. It'll be interesting to see, though, what happens once the sun ingresses into Aquarius, whether that kind of changes sentiment. But I certainly think in the short term that it doesn't really, or the fact that it's moving actually away, I should bear that in mind too, that it's actually moving, Mercury's moving in this direction, as is Venus. It's moving clockwise because both of them are retrograde. So actually, yes, so Mercury and Saturn are pulling apart. So it'd be interesting to see what happens once the sun moves past Mercury and towards Saturn. It could actually lighten that Saturn a little bit, which is actually opposing the Ethereum Mercury in Leo. So it's interesting that we've got these 3 chart points in Leo, which is quite sunny and upbeat and optimistic, and but yes, I think certainly while Saturn is opposing Mercury, which in this case I think rules the midheaven and most of the 7th house, that could sort of dampen sentiment in the short term, and mean that people are not really, they still kind of need to be convinced, if you like, of the sort of the use case, of Ethereum. And I think, this is particularly where people are starting to get a little bit skeptical about NFTs. A lot of people were quite sort of bullish on the idea of selling art, as kind of like, NFTs. But I think now people are becoming a little bit skeptical of that, because the whole point of the value of art, sort of fine art in particular, is that it's rare. And so if you've got an NFT which is just a JPEG, which can be copied and used by many people, that does somewhat detract from value. because the whole point of showing art is to put something in a gallery, and then you can only see that particular artwork in that gallery or wherever it's being displayed. But if you've got something as a sort of a, as I said, JPEG, then anyone can sort of download the JPEG and put it on their screen as a screensaver or whatever it is. So this question of like ownership, I think, is, and exclusivity hasn't quite been answered when it comes to fine art. But what I think is going to become more of sort of an area of interest, I think, is going to be more to do with leisure and pleasure. And that's certainly something that Leo is familiar with. You know, I think experiences maybe are kind of where things are perhaps going to gravitate towards in terms of things like NFTs and, you know, the metaverse. And, you know, here things like music, sport, you know, anything that involves an experience, I think, could be where we start to see sort of growth, as opposed to things that we want to own. Because I think that there's a bit of an issue there with the whole kind of, you know, this element of kind of exclusivity and sort of sole ownership versus kind of group ownership, or kind of, you know, and that was essentially the downfall of a lot of the media and the photographic industry with the rise of the internet, because images could so easily be kind of copied. That's, I do think that this is something that is going to sort of raise its head as an issue kind of going forward. You know, as people, more and more people get interested in the sort of the NFT kind of market. So yeah, I think that's sort of something to watch. So yes, as I say, Ethereum does tend to kind of mirror Bitcoin, and if Bitcoin is not really likely to kind of bounce until the end of January, beginning of February, I very much doubt that Ethereum will either. That's just my gut reaction, and it doesn't seem that way in the chart either. But as I say, I do just need to get used to the Ethereum chart, because you know, until you kind of get a lay of the land, it is then very difficult to then extrapolate and make predictions. Yes, but still, and you know, kind of interesting stuff. Yeah, so that's kind of it for me. I think that's all I really want to kind of say. I hope this has been sort of helpful and useful, and at least kind of given people a sense that you know, all hope is not lost. As I say, I do think that the next 2 weeks are going to be relatively uneventful, and that's fine. I think that's more or less what is expected in terms of the astrology. Beginning of February will be interesting, so I will obviously do my new moon forecast when we get to the beginning of February. But yes, in the meantime, I hope that's been helpful or useful to you. Do go and check out my video on the 6-month cycle related to the solar eclipse. I think that will probably give you a bit of a wider macro view if you haven't seen it already. But anyway, I'm wishing all the very best for this full moon. Take care, and I'll see you again in a couple of weeks.